Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So I think we had stopped at the good of the extremes, right? We had talked about the two extremes and how both the on their own are not the right way. In fact, Sri Aurobindo has even called it evil, sometimes a mistake, because it does not take care of the whole of the divine, right? Now he's giving us the good of both the extremes. See, which means what is the good of being on earth? That's the most important thing. What is the good of being in life? And Sri Aurobindo gives us two goals for life on earth. He says life must become a means for progress, a means for self-enlargement, a means for perfection. So this is one goal for life on earth. Now many people would feel कि ये तो हम कर ही रहे हैं. I am anyway working towards my self-progression, towards my self-perfection. Then there is another goal that's been given in the Isha Upanishad. And that other goal for life on earth is of reaching the state of realization of non-birth or Akshara Brahman as the font from which this birth emerges. And then not only knowing that, but rooting ourselves there in the Akshara Brahman, rooting ourselves in the non-birth, which is the very font of our existence. And more important than rooting ourselves in the non-birth is that we are able to root ourselves, and all that we do does not come from our ego. Our ego sense is wiped out, and everything we do actually flows from there as if through a flute. And then later on in this chapter, we'll hear Sri Aurobindo saying, then we will be able to enjoy immortality. It is one thing to know what is immortality, and it is another to enjoy immortality while in birth. Right? These two tendencies actually are not exclusive of each other, birth and non-birth. But if you view them in the right perspective, you'll find that both supplement each other and complement each other. Each one has its own benefits when practiced in coordination with the other or with inclusiveness of the other. This is the basic thrust of Isha Upanishad, and this is one of the important pairs of opposites of the Isha Upanishad. Now let's start reading the good of the extremes. On the other hand, each of these tendencies, pursued with a certain relativeness to the other, has its own fruit and its own good. Non-birth, pursued as the goal of birth, and a higher, fuller, and truer existence, may lead to withdrawal into the silent Brahman or into the pure liberty of the non-being. So if we pursue only non-birth, we may enter into that nihil, the pure liberty of the non-being, and withdrawal into the silent Brahman, but that is not the aim for which the divine has made this life, has made this universe. Birth, pursued as a means of progress and self-enlargement, leads to a greater and fuller life, which may, in its turn, become a vestibule to the final achievement. So if life in the manifested world has for its goal getting out of manifestation, then success in that endeavor would mean a complete withdrawal into the silent Brahman or into the pure, illimitable, featureless existence, what Isha Upanishad calls the non-birth. And on the other hand, if birth is pursued as the only means of progress and perfection, and birth is pursued separately, individually, with the exclusion of non-birth, then we would be lost in this endless cycle of birth and death, and we wouldn't be able to really achieve the higher goals. So, perfection can be achieved only on the basis and foundation of non-birth, and while we are in birth, we are rooted in non-birth, And we are allowing non-birth to actually flow through us, that silence, that peace, and our ego has been vanquished. Then both birth and non-birth lead together to the perfect way. They complete each other. Right? So, should we go ahead, or are there any questions till this point? Go ahead. The perfect way. But neither of these results is perfect in itself, nor the true goal of humanity. Each of them brings its intended portion into the perfect good of the human soul only when it is completed by the other. Both complete each other. The whole thrust of Isha Upanishad, as I said earlier, is on inclusiveness. On one, embracing the multiplicity of the manifestation in birth, and then the oneness of the Supreme in non-birth. Brahman is both Vidya and Avidya, both birth and non-birth. Just to remind you that Vidya is the knowledge of oneness and unity. Avidya is the getting into the multiplicity of life and being drowned in the ego and desire and the worldly things without any idea, any remembrance of the oneness of this universe. And if one pursues, I just want to remind you those two verses, they were so beautiful, those three verses, 9 to 11. If one pursues avidya, or the life of multiplicity, to the exclusiveness of vidya, one enters into darkness or ignorance. Remember that? So, if one pursues vidya alone, then one enters into a greater darkness. Now, why would that be? Because when one goes into vidya alone, one enters into that little light which gives a sense of finality. And one doesn't even look for the truth of multiplicity. That is why the Isha Upanishad says that when we follow vidya alone, then we enter into a greater darkness than if we follow avidya alone. Brahman is both vidya and avidya, both birth and non-birth. Brahman is both the unmanifest and the power to manifest and the manifestation itself, right? Brahman is both the unmanifest, which has the potentiality to manifest, and it is the manifestation as well. This world is an outcome of a conscious act. Vidya is the consciousness of unity or oneness with the potentiality of multiplicity. I'm just repeating myself so it actually goes home completely. And avidya is the act of multiplicity or diversity and the chain of cause and effect. One gets into the chain of cause and effect. I'll read ahead. The realization of the self as the unborn and the poise of the soul beyond the dualities of birth and death in the infinite and transcendent existence are the conditions of a free and divine life in the becoming. See, one needs a platform for the dancer. We've given this analogy earlier also. If the aim of life is a free and divine life in the manifestation, then the condition is that this life has to be founded on one platform which is unchanging, which is immovable, unchanging, immutable poise of the self. And that becomes a platform. The non-birth is the platform which gives us the stability for the mutability, for the changeability of life in birth. Am I clear? According to Sri Aurobindo, in the life divine, Brahman, by virtue of the power of Maya, self-discrimination, annasya chittam abhisanjaranyam, he is becoming other than himself, he acquires three statuses. We talked about those three statuses, I think, yesterday. The transcendent, which means that which is beyond the cosmos, the cosmic, which is the universal, and the individual, right? So this is the description of the transcendent who transcends all this. Now, he has become the individual. For the individual, the most beautiful verse in the Gita, I think it's there in our reference, and I've sent the reference to everybody, so Suresh doesn't have to pull it out, is this very beautiful verse of Bhagavad Gita, which also we had quoted yesterday, chapter 18, verse 61. Ishwarah sarva bhutanam riddeshe arjuna tishtati brahmayan sarva bhutani yantra rudhani mayaya. That the Lord, O Arjuna, is seated in the heart of all existences. He is seated within each one of us, but in his cosmic status, he's turning us around and around as if we are mounted on a machine. And this he does by the force of his Maya. Another analogy that Sri Aurobindo gives him is, he says that it's actually, he calls it the fly on the wheel magnificence. That suppose a train is running really fast and a fly is sitting on the wheel of the train. The fly feels, Dekha, see how fast I'm making the train run. Is it the fly which is making the train run? And this is what he calls the fly on the wheel magnificence. We think ourselves to be that I'm running this. I'm not doing anything. It is being run by nature. Nature is just going on. And we are just that one little cog in the wheel. And all we can do is actually collaborate with nature and move with the flow of the nature. And we'd actually be collaborating with him. Now, when will we be realized? We will be realized when we realize the self as the transcendent, as the Akshara Brahman and the Kshara Brahman, the Brahman which becomes all this, which has become all this. And together with all this, when we realize the infinity of the soul within us, which goes beyond the dualities of birth and death. Inside us is the soul, the Antaratman. And we have to realize the transcendent Brahman, which is the Akshara Brahman, the Kshara Brahman, and the soul within us, the Antaratman within us. And for the soul to be able to assert its immortality, so the soul is immortal. And for the soul to assert its immortality in outer life is the condition for a free life, a divine life in this manifestation. The one is necessary to the other. Vidya and avidya, both are necessary. To be poised in non-birth and to work consciously in birth is necessary. It is by participation in the pure unity of the immobile Akshara Brahman that the soul is released from its absorption in the stream of the movement. See, the release of the soul or its enlightenment means that it should be able to disengage itself from its complete involvement in the stream of the manifested world, and by its participation and active involvement in the pure unity of the inactive, immobile Akshara Brahman. You've got it? Or should I repeat myself? Repeat myself? The release of the soul or the enlightenment means that the soul should be able to disengage itself from its complete involvement, that it gets bound by the work that is doing in the universe. It's like going round and round and round and round in the work that is doing in the universe, absolutely unaware, not cognizant of the Akshara Brahman, of the non-birth. The whole poise has to be that we are rooted there and we are working here. That's where my roots are, but the work is here. That is the secret of the whole game. And then the soul would be released. So released, it identifies itself with the Lord, to whom becoming and non-becoming are only modes of his existence, and is able to enjoy immortality in the manifestation without being caught in the wheel of nature's delusions. Would you like me to read this again? Should I read this again? So released, it means the soul identifies itself with the Lord, to whom becoming and non-becoming are only modes of his existence. Birth and non-birth are only modes of the Lord's existence, and is able to enjoy immortality in the manifestation without being caught in the wheel of nature's delusions. This release or enlightenment of the individual soul enable it to identify itself not with the present life on earth but with the Lord himself, and enjoy immortality in the manifestation without being caught in the wheel of the manifested life, manifested world. Such an identification with the Lord enables one to see becoming and non-becoming, birth and non-birth. And how does he see birth and non-birth, becoming and non-becoming? As only modes of his existence. They are statuses of his existence, right? The necessity of birth ceases. Its personal object having been fulfilled, the freedom of becoming remains. So beautiful. Saying that the necessity of birth ceases, then once one has become of the nature of the divine, Madbhavam, we have become his nature, then the necessity of being born again and again ceases. But then it is left to our choice. We can choose to come again and again to do the divine's work on earth. But it isn't out of a compulsion that we have still not accomplished the task of becoming the divine nature. So future births become a matter of choice and not a necessity after one has reached enlightenment. For the divine enjoys equally and simultaneously the freedom of his eternity and the freedom of his becoming. Just as the divine enjoys the freedom both of birth and non-birth, becoming and non-becoming, just in the potentiality that he can become, vidya and avidya. Similarly, the enlightened soul too enjoys both simultaneously. Once he has become of the nature of the divine, then he can enjoy both simultaneously, just like the divine. It may even be said that to have had the conscious experience of a dissolution of the very idea of being into the supreme non-being is necessary for the fullest and freest possession of being itself. Have you understood, or should I read this sentence again? It may even be said that to have had the conscious experience of a dissolution of the very idea of being into the supreme non-being is necessary for the fullest and freest possession of being itself. Now, Robert Browning had once said, "What do they know of England who only England know?" What does that mean? That if I need to know you, if I need to know Sarita, then just to know Sarita, I would not know Sarita. I would need to know the circumstances of Sarita, the surroundings of Sarita. How does she live? What are her circumstances to be able to really understand Sarita? So similarly, if we need to understand non-being, then it may be said that to have the conscious experience, then we need to also have the conscious experience maybe of being actually dissolving itself into non-being. Just to know what is it. To understand something, one has to also go outside it and place it in a perspective. Right? Non-being is that status of the transcendent which is featureless. Right? It is static. Static too is a feature though. Anirvachaniya and avarnaniya. That's the way the transcendent is. Advitiya. It cannot be described. Now, being is a conscious pure existence. Pure self-conscious existence. To understand being, one would have to understand the non-being. And for the being to fully appreciate, it is necessary to get out of itself and consciously dissolve itself in the non-being only temporarily to be able to understand what is non-being. That is what this sentence means. Now, this is one of the difficult ones, and I'm sure Sarita will come up and say, how does one dissolve oneself? Even I don't know. Yeah.
Anjali, this conscious experience, does it mean that if we can have some kind of experience of the divine, which will enable us to like make it more stronger our aspiration?
Yes, that's what this. If you're talking of this particular statement, this
Yeah.
particular statement is saying to have the conscious experience of a dissolution. That, sometimes when one is deep in conscious meditation,
Yeah.
then they're talking of that in that one could have a conscious experience of the dissolution of the being into the non-being. They're just talking of that. This would be, from the synthetic standpoint, the justification of the great effort of Buddhism to exceed the conception of all positive being, even in its widest or purest essentiality. Synthetic standpoint means that point of view which takes a non-being into account to understand its own self-conscious existence as being. That is synthetic. Na? Anything that synthesizes two or three or most or all, that is called being synthesized. Now, this is the reason that Buddha felt the need of the non-being, the void, the nil, or what he called shunya, as being a necessary element for a full appreciation of the being. Buddha's attempt was never to go into philosophy. For example, Buddha would say that suppose a thorn is lodged in your foot. Now, when you go to a friend to help to get the thorn pulled out, you won't say, Kecha, don't pull it out just now. First tell me, how did this happen? Why did the thorn come in? What is the thorn? What is my foot? He said, what's the point of going into the philosophy? Let us do that by which the sorrow, the misery can be actually removed. That was Buddha's philosophy of not going into philosophy. But that necessarily is not the philosophy to follow. It depends on what is the need of a person. Thus, by dissolution of ego and of the attachment to birth, the soul crosses beyond death. It is liberated from all limitation in the dualities. Thus, by dissolution of ego and dissolution of one's attachment to birth, the soul crosses beyond death. Death in Isha Upanishad, I'm reminding again, means when one is caught in the tentacles of the manifestation, caught in the tentacles of ego and desire and all the problems that birth comes with. So crossing beyond death means becoming liberated from over-involvement in the manifestation. Now here I think we should read verse 14 once. He who knows that as both in one, the birth and the dissolution of birth, by the dissolution crosses beyond death, and by the birth enjoys immortality. Right? Because we must remember again, crosses beyond death is getting out of the tentacles of ego and desire and all the difficulties of birth. He who knows that as both in one, the birth and the dissolution of birth, by the dissolution crosses beyond death. So by the dissolution, by non-birth, one crosses beyond the tentacles of ego and desire, and by the birth enjoys immortality. And by coming into embodiment and rooted there, then one is able to enjoy immortality. Right? By the dissolution of ego, we've understood that one's attachment to birth then one is able to cross beyond that. This leads to actually an expansion of our consciousness, and one passes beyond one's limitations in the duality. Having attained this liberation, it accepts becoming as a process of nature, subject to the soul and not binding upon it. And by this free and divine becoming, enjoys immortality. So what this sentence is saying is that after achieving this liberation, the liberated soul accepts the working of nature as a process governed by itself, because the soul has identified itself with the divine himself. So after this happens, what do we start seeing? We start seeing nature as a process which is governed by God. And so it is governed by me only. And I'm actually becoming one with nature, because the soul has identified itself with the divine himself. Right? Was that clear till now?
Anjali,
Yeah.
can death and birth can be related to Satya and Satya also?
Just a minute.
Like death and non-birth and birth.
Are you comparing? Who's speaking just now? Renu?
I'm Sangeeta.
Huh? Sangeeta. Okay, Sangeeta. Okay. So can you repeat your question, please?
I'm saying birth and non-birth, can it be equated to Satya and Asatya also?
No.
Okay.
Because Satya itself has so many deeper meanings. Birth and non-birth cannot be equated with that. No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Should we move ahead? If everybody is comfortable till now? Huh? Okay. The justification of life. Thus, the third movement of the Upanishad is a justification of life and works. Life and works are actually synonymous. One cannot be in life and not work. And this even the Gita has told us, that even if you're just breathing and eating and sleeping, that much you have to do to live. Even if you're doing just that, you are doing works. So don't ever think that you can become a karmani, that you can be without doing any works. Because even if you're sleeping, that is doing a work. Even eating is doing some work, right? So life and works are synonymous. Thus, the third movement of the Upanishad is a justification of life and works, which were enjoined upon the seeker of the truth in its second verse. Now, please open the second verse. Second verse is in the beginning, page 3. Kurvanneveha karmani jiji visheshatam samaha evam tvai nanyathe tosti na karma lipyate nare. Doing verily works in this world, one should wish to live 100 years. Thus it is in thee, and not otherwise than this, action cleaves not to a man. So, just like in the first movement, the first three verses, the second verse clearly says that we must be doing action, but action in what manner? The way it was told in the first verse, by renouncing. By renouncing, you must act. By offering, you must act. So that is the way one must wish to live 100 years. And it is like this and not otherwise. And once one does action like this, then the action does not bind us. Now this also reflects on the verse, very famous verse of Gita, Karmanyeva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. Right? Even in that, what does the Gita say? That you should be focusing all your attention on how you're doing the karma, not on what the karma will give to you as a fruit. But very clever, Sri Krishna knows that when I remove the fruit as your the thing that you're going to get after doing the action. So you may stop wanting to do karma. So he says very cleverly in the very second sentence that, but do not be attached to non-action. Action must continue through you. So we are just connecting the verses of the Veda, the verses of the Isha Upanishad, and the verses of Bhagavad Gita. So the third movement, again, justifies life and works, which has also been referred to in the second verse. The thrust of Isha Upanishad is not only on reconciling opposites, which of course it does, but also highlights the importance of the dynamic aspect of the Supreme, and therefore stresses on doing works on its readers. It tells its readers that doing works is very, very important, and that is one of the thrusts of the Isha Upanishad, besides synthesizing opposites. Works are the essence of life. Works are actually the inherent nature of life. One cannot remain without doing works. Life is a manifestation of the Brahman. In Brahman, the life principle arranges a harmony of the 7 principles of conscious being, by which that manifestation works out its involution and evolution. Now here I would like to bring to the fore reference number 10. Suresh, are you there? Please bring reference 10 to the front. Suresh? Reference 10. Yeah. So, the Vedas have explained life and this whole universe as if it has been divided into 7 planes or 7 worlds, and it has been described by an image of a bull, and the bull has been described as Chatushringa, that which has 4 horns which are going upwards and 3 feet which are going downwards. See, this is the imagery of the Vedas. The 4 horns, starting from the top, is Sat, Satchidanand, Sat, or the divine being or self-existent. Then there is Chit, or divine consciousness. Then there is Ananda, or divine bliss. And then there is Vijnana, or supermind or soul plane. And then when we come to the 3 lower in which we are living, there is Manas, or mental plane, Prana, or vital plane, and Anna, or physical plane. These are the 3 lower worlds. Haven't we heard Annamay, Pranamay, and Manomay koshas? These are the 3. Right? Everybody is clear? We are living on the 3. Anna, that's our physical body. Prana is our vital or emotional body. Manas is a mental body. Right? And when we are done on earth and the Antaratma leaves the physical body, then it travels in the vital plane, and once it has exhausted all its baggage of the vital plane, then it goes to the mental plane. Once it has exhausted all its baggage of the mental plane, then it goes into this center plane, which is the Vijnana plane, or the supermind, or the soul plane, where it rests and rests and rests and rests and assimilates what it has done in the past lives. And after a lot of rest, it thinks and plans the next life. It chooses if it is an evolved soul, or else it sees its next life, where the next life would take it, and what learning possibilities there are in the next life. And then it comes back. So these are the koshas that have already been formed. The top 3 worlds, the koshas have not yet been formed. The Ananda plane, the Chit plane, and the Sat plane, the koshas have not been formed yet. So now we can come back. You can remove it, yeah. Life is a manifestation of the Brahman.
Anjali, what do you mean by not being formed yet?
Yeah, so how do I explain it? Okay, so if you need to go to USA, you need to have an office of USA in India, right? Only then you can get a visa from there, and only then can you go to US, right or wrong?
Yeah.
So the koshas of Sat, Chit and Ananda have yet not been formed. So they are something that we are aware of, but our movement there has yet not been accomplished. It is only up to the supermind that we can lead, that we can reach.
That is for the normal human being, no? Maybe for the realized souls, they might
No,
have...
the kosha has not been formed yet.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, that's what we've heard from Sri Aurobindo, but after that also many years have elapsed. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks.
Life is a manifestation of the Brahman. In Brahman, the life principle arranges a harmony of the 7 principles of conscious being, by which that manifestation works out its involution and evolution. So we know someday we can do the story of creation again with all of you, although we've done it so many times. But we can do it again sometime with the PowerPoint presentation, so that we understand how involution took place. The divine actually started hiding himself and hiding his consciousness and becoming the opposite of himself. And that is the whole process of involution, which happened through the 7 worlds till he came to the world which is even below matter. And that is the inconscient. And from there, it started evolving. And that is the process of evolution that evolved into matter. And then from matter, life started sprouting out, vegetation started coming out. And then from there, the lower animals, the larger animals, and then the mind started coming out. That's where the evil started. Before the emergence of mind, there was no evil. There was no error, there was no evil. Once mind started coming, then the evil started. And that is the evolution that we are carrying forward. Right? The Brahman manifests itself as life. Now there is something called life principle, which is called in the Vedas and the Upanishads, it's called Matarishwan. It's the ether principle on which is the life principle itself. Right? I won't be able to describe it more. We already did it when we did the verses, the earlier verses. We did Matarishwan. So the whole process of manifestation is enabled by the life principle, which arranges itself into these 7 planes of consciousness: Sat, Chit, Ananda, the truth plane or the soul plane or the Vigyan plane or the supermind, and then the mind plane, the life plane, and the matter plane. In these 7 planes, Brahman works out its process of involution as it hides itself, and it becomes annasya chittam, becomes other than itself. And then the evolution, the process of evolution becomes when there is a flowering out, a blossoming out of the real nature from within us. In Brahman, Matarishwan disposes the waters, the 7-fold movement of the divine existence. Matarishwan, or the life force, has already been described as the one who extends himself in the mother or the container. So this whole universe is like the mother container. And the container itself is the divine, because everything is within the divine. And Matarishwan is the life principle, and waters in the Vedas denotes life itself. The 7 planes have been described as 3 inferior: physical, vital, and mental, as we just saw, and the 4 superior: the Vijnana or supermind, Ananda, Chit, and Sat. That divine existence is the Lord who has gone abroad in the movement. Now, if you remember the 8th verse, where he used terms like Kavihi, Manishi, Paribhu, Swayambhu. So the Swayambhu, the divine himself, he became the Kavi who actually had the vision, the truth idea. That idea which came together with it, the whole method of accomplishment came with the idea. There was no lag between the two. And Swayambhu is the Lord who has gone abroad. Gone abroad means he expanded himself. Sa Paryagat, in the 8th verse he says, Sa Paryagat, he expanded himself and he became Paribhu in a very orderly fashion. It was not done in a haphazard fashion. It was done in a very orderly fashion. This was the role of the supermind. There is nothing random, nothing happens by chance. There is a meaning in each line and curve, as Sri Aurobindo says in Savitri. That divine existence is the Lord who has gone abroad in the movement and unrolled the universe in his 3 modes as all-seer of the truth of things, thinker out of their possibilities, realizer of their actualities. Now here we can read the, Suresh, if you can take out reference 12 once. Yes. So you see, now in this, it is he, Sa Paryagat Chukram Akayam Avranam Asnaviram Shuddham Apapa Viddham Kavir Manishi Paribhu Swayambhur Yatha Tathya Torthan Vyadadhat Shashwati Bhya Samabhya. He is Swayambhu. As the great ordainer, he was a great ordainer. He ordained this entire universe. He fixed it right in the beginning. All that will happen in the manifested world through the movement of successive time. And as here it has been mentioned, his 3 modes, what are the 3 modes? The first that has been mentioned in this sentence is all seer of the truth of things. All seer of the truth of things is Kavihi. Thinker out of their possibilities, Manishi. Realizer of their actualities, Paribhu. And the divine existence in the beginning of the sentence, that is Swayambhu. So all these 3, Swayambhu has become, it is actualization of his own vision. For example, just as a carpet, when a carpet is unrolled, what comes out when the carpet is unrolled is not something else. It is what is already contained in the carpet is just being unraveled, unrolled. Similarly, Swayambhu already had it all within him. And as Swayambhu started unrolling, unraveling, opening himself, we see him as Kavi, we see him as Manishi, we see him as Paribhu, who actually becomes all this, and he becomes the entire universe. And all this happens simultaneously. There is not a lag between his thinking and his manifestation, right? And all this happens in a very organized fashion. We must remember that it's all done in a very organized manner. He has determined all things sovereignly in their own nature, development, and goal from years sempiternal. Saparyagat Yathatorthan Vyadadhat Shashwati Bhya Samabhya. He, Swayambhu, as the great ordainer, fixed right in the beginning all that will happen in this manifested world through the movement of successive time. He ordained it all in the beginning. That determination works out through his double power of Vidya. Vidya is unity and oneness, and Avidya, multiplicity, consciousness of essential unity, and consciousness of phenomenal multiplicity. I'll read this sentence again. That determination works out through his double power of Vidya and Avidya, consciousness of essential unity and consciousness of phenomenal multiplicity. What Swayambhu ordains, his work, he works it out through his two powers. Swayambhu had ordained it, right? Kavi had the vision, Manishi was the thinker, Parivu made it happen. But what are the powers that he uses? He uses the power of Vidya, or that knowledge of oneness, and the power of multiplicity, by which he can become the multiplicity, become the many. Phenomenal means that which has become in time and space. Somebody had a question? Okay. Should I continue? Okay. The multiplicity carried to its extreme limit returns upon itself in the conscious individual who is the Lord, inhabiting the forms of the movement and enjoying first the play of the ignorance. See, when something बोलते ना कि इसका पाप का घड़ा भरने दो, या बोलते हैं let it reach that point where there is no more left, and then it will try to break open that which its eyes have closed. The eyes have closed themselves too. This is what it is saying here. The multiplicity carried to its extreme limit. The multiplicity, when it goes on and going in the direction of avidya, the direction of ego, the direction of desire, without opening its eyes towards the other higher level, towards oneness, and it reaches that nether, that the lowest point, nadir they say, there it may find that spring, and by which it will make an about turn. The multiplicity, carried to its extreme limit, returns upon itself in the conscious individual who is the Lord, inhabiting the forms of the movement and enjoying first the play of the ignorance. The individual soul or Antaratman, when it consciously aspires, starts, after it has gone down to the bottom, then when it starts consciously aspiring for the larger, consciously aspiring for the wider, consciously aspiring for the divine, then that actually is, who is that who is aspiring? Remember the verse of the Gita? Udharet Atmana Atmanam. It is the Atma itself which aspires for itself, to know itself. Udharet Atmana Atmanam. So then the Atma starts awakening to the Lord, and it starts aspiring towards the Lord for union with the Lord. And here I am reminded of a very beautiful Iqbal ki chota sa sher hai. Suresh can take it out, reference 13. Yeah. आँखें थी रूहे यार पर. Now this we are talking about a little speck of dust. Now that speck of dust is looking at the sun, and his eyes are set on the sun. Now look at this speck of dust as your own Atma, and look at the sun as the divine himself. Aankhein thi ruhe yaar par. The gaze of that speck of dust was fixed on the beloved light. Aankhon mein ruhe yaar tha. The beloved's image was reflected in the individual eye. Zarra tha aftab mein. The speck of dust had captured the sunlight. Zarra tha aftab mein. Zarre mein aftab tha. And thereby the sun was contained and reflected in the speck. So the speck of dust had actually captured the sunlight, and thereby the sun was actually contained, not only reflected, but contained in that speck. I mean, I don't know if this fits in here or doesn't, but I was just reminded of this one sher, that when the soul, the Antaratman, ho gaya, Suresh, thank you, that when the soul starts aspiring for the sun, for the divine, then it's not only the soul which is aspiring for the divine is aspiring for himself. And he starts reflecting himself within the soul. And the soul captures the light of the divine. And the divine is moving towards the soul, and the soul is moving towards the divine. So beautiful is that journey.
Now when you say that.
Yeah, the light is captured, completely captured, and then it's loved because it's the beloved, and the beloved is within the means of the soul, and the joy, the bliss, the delight of being in that light, isn't it? Sounds so beautiful. Afterwards, should I carry on? Should I move forward?
Yes.
Afterwards, by development in the ignorance, the soul returns to the capacity of knowledge and enjoys by the knowledge immortality. I'll repeat the sentence. Afterwards, by development in the ignorance, the soul returns to the capacity of knowledge and enjoys by the knowledge immortality. So the individual soul first experiences and enjoys its play in the ignorance. It really enjoys the ego, the desire, the play in the ignorance, the fun and the difficulties, both of them. And then as the outer being starts developing, the soul starts regaining its knowledge. It starts moving upwards as if it was something that I was unaware of. And wow, there's so much light in the other type of life. And starts enjoying its actual status as it moves upwards and moves towards the light. It starts enjoying its actual status of immortality, as well as it starts enjoying multiplicity, vidya, avidya. Even the avidya it enjoys when it can see it with the light of knowledge. When we are inside avidya, unconscious of vidya, then we are not enjoying avidya. We think we are enjoying avidya, but we are caught in the tenterhooks of ego and desire and the dualities and the difficulties of the phenomenal, the difficulties of time and space. But once one realizes and one starts turning one's gaze towards oneness, towards unity, towards vastness, towards the other kind of life, and when one has come out of the tentacles of ego and desire and death, what is called death in the Upanishad, and then when one looks at life, then life doesn't seem to be such a pot of dualities because one is looking at it from a distance. One is not like the fly in the ointment. One has come out of it and then one is looking at it, and then one can enjoy immortality. Right? There was another very beautiful, the verse is very difficult and I don't remember it, but there's a mystic called Kudus, and he, in his Urdu, it's a very difficult Urdu verse, I can't remember it, but he says that he's talking to God and he's saying, you are very clever, huh? You became this universe, and once you became this universe, you have covered your eyes with your own sleeve, and you are behaving as if you do not know who has created it. So you created it, then you became the universe, and then you covered your own eyes. And isn't this the fact? The divine has become this universe. He is right there inside us, inside everybody, as the Antaratman. And he has covered his eyes. And most of us are ignorant, unaware completely of who has created the universe. What is the real purpose of the universe? And the universe goes on. It's not that the universe is not going on. It goes on and on and on. And he stays with his eyes closed because there is a law which he has placed for himself. And the law says that till the outer being does not call you, do not speak, do not throw your light. The outer being must call. The whole law is that till the outer being does not call, he will remain with his eyes closed. Now, these are very important sentences, the last few sentences. This immortality is gained by the dissolution of the limited ego and its chain of births into the consciousness of the unborn and undying, the eternal the Lord, the ever free. Actually, it is only in this embodied condition that we will be able to root ourselves in the unity, in the oneness, and actually be living in this multiplicity but free from ego. I have repeated this many times and I will go on repeating it because this is the most important point to be understood, that it is in this embodied condition that immortality must be enjoyed. Because otherwise, in the non-birth, we are anyway immortal, right? The state of immortality is actually gained by the dissolution of the limited ego. And it's being trapped in the chain of rebirth, birth, rebirth, compulsively. We can choose to be born and reborn again and again. That's a different question. But when we have to come here compulsorily, because we have not become Madbhavam, we have not yet become perfect, we have yet not become the divine, then when we are coming here compulsively, not by choice, and entering into the consciousness of the we have to get out of this consciousness of compulsive birth and rebirth, right? But it is enjoyed by a free and divine becoming in the universe and not outside the universe. It is one thing to reach immortality, and it is quite another thing to enjoy immortality. Here, Sri Aurobindo explicitly gives the differentiation. He says that one who has reached immortality can enjoy immortality only when he is present in this diversity of birth, in the becoming, and not in the void, not by getting out of it in the non-birth. One cannot enjoy immortality in the void or nihil. It can be enjoyed in the condition of the birth only when one has become free of ego and free of desire. जब एक हो गए तो उनको एक्सपीरियंस क्या करेंगे? हम और वो तो एक ही हो गए ना, like that pot of honey. जब हम वो every drop of honey has become the same, how will he enjoy the sweetness of the honey? It has become as sweet as the other droplets. So how can we enjoy immortality when we have become that in the nail? We can enjoy immortality when we are here. And we can enjoy immortality while we are here when we have, by making an effort, by making a progress, by reaching upwards towards perfection, by the dint of effort when we have reached there. What are you doing? You're doing a huge amount of sadhana. With all this effort, if there comes about some kind of a disentanglement of the ego, and one starts realizing, Arey, in this situation, I would have reacted in such and such manner earlier. But now, there is no reaction. There is a sense of satisfaction, a sense of growth, a sense of progress. And that is what we call enjoyment by the dint of effort that you have grown into it, right? And that can happen only in the embodied condition. But it is enjoyed by a free and divine becoming in the universe and not outside the universe. For there, it is always possessed. For immortality of oneness is anyway the inherent nature of the divine in the transcendent or in the non-birth. But here, in the material body, it is to be worked out and enjoyed. By whom? By the divine inhabitant, the soul or Antaratman, under circumstances that are in appearance the most opposite to its terms in the life of the individual and in the multiple life of the universe. So, here in the material body and this universe, where the unity and oneness is actually fractured, it isn't whole. The unity and oneness is not whole. Here it has to be achieved or it has to be rebuilt. And then only it can be enjoyed by the soul. So I repeat myself, when the ananda is lost, the delight is lost when we become embodied. And then when we regain the ananda of immortality, then we are able to enjoy immortality here on earth. Life has to be transcended in order that it may be freely accepted. The works of the universe have to be overpassed in order that they may be divinely fulfilled. One has to go beyond life to fully understand and accept life. If we live only in life, Abhi, we were saying, if we live only in the oneness, then what will we enjoy? We are anyway immortal. We will not enjoy immortality. It is when we lose immortality in life. Now, when we are in life and we are stuck in the threads of life, we will not be able to enjoy it. We have to disentangle ourselves. To appreciate the inherent divinity in life and the universe in the birth, one has to go beyond the birth, beyond the universe, beyond life, to its roots in the non-birth. The soul, even in apparent bondage, is really free and only plays at being bound. This we have said earlier, that the soul is really free. And it appears and projects itself to be bound, because that is the law on it. That you will appear to be bound till you are called out by the matter, till you are called out by the life or prana or the vital emotional being, till you are called out by the mental or the manas, mental being. The soul, even in apparent bondage, is really free and only plays at being bound. But it has to go back to the consciousness of freedom and possess and enjoy universally not this or that, but the divine and the all. The soul, which actually projects itself to be bound, has to go back through the perfection of the outer physical being, the perfection of the vital or emotional being, the perfection of the mental being. The soul has to reach again the consciousness of freedom, the consciousness of immortality. It must finally possess and enjoy not a limited version of the divine, but the plenitude, the completeness, the totality of the divine. And where is the divine? The divine is not only transcendent, the divine is in the cosmos. He is in the all, and he is within me. So then, when the soul is able to enjoy the divine, become self-aware, become aware of itself, then become aware of the divine in the entire cosmos, in the inanimate and the animate, and then move forward and see the divine in the transcendent, that which is the Akshara Brahman, but which has a potentiality to become. Then he is able to see the divine in all the three statuses, transcendent, cosmic, and individual. Then the soul is able to enjoy immortality. I think that's the end of the chapter. I really didn't think I had kept all the time from Monday to Friday for this, but we finished it only within 2 days, because this was a very short chapter. If there are any questions, I would.
Anjali, इसके
Yes.
previous page में the last half of the last line that are in appearance the most opposite to its terms. I didn't understand what is most opposite to its terms.
Is it part of justification of life or the passage?
Justification of life में in the end. At the end of the page, no, not the end of the end of the page, that page 61.
1 minute.
Which begins with this immortality is gained by the
third last paragraph of the lesson.
Actually, I read it from my notes. No? So we're talking of the place where it starts with immortality.
Yeah, that para which starts with this immortality is gained. This end of this para, this appearance, in appearance, the most opposite to its terms.
Acha. Okay. But it is enjoyed by a free and divine becoming in the universe and not outside the universe. ये तो clear है ना? It is enjoyed by a free and divine becoming in the universe, because outside the universe it is anyway free.
Yeah.
For there it is always possessed. Outside the universe, immortality is always possessed. But here in the material body, it is to be worked out and enjoyed by the divine inhabitant. Who's the divine inhabitant? The soul or the Antaratman.
Yeah.
So this immortality, this freedom has to be enjoyed by the soul. We talked about Uddharet Atmana Atmanam. The Atma has to grow to be able to enjoy this immortality under circumstances that are in appearance the most opposite to its terms. So while we are in the universe, while we are in birth, we are in the phenomenal existence. And in the phenomenal existence, we are bound by time and space. And not only time and space, what happens is we have to live in the dualities. We have to see birth, we have to see death, we see all kind of ugly things which are the very opposite of its own real nature. What do we see in life? Do we see the same as the divine is? Do we see that? We see it's exactly opposite. So in appearance, the most opposite to its terms in the life of the individual and in the multiple life of the universe.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, what so most opposite to its term means the ugly side of it.
Yeah, the ugly side of life, which is exactly opposite of its own nature. Okay. But when it is in birth, it has to face all this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Any other questions, anybody?
Anjali, can we read page 86 and 87? Sri Aurobindo has really explained Vidya, birth and non-birth very well.
No, that we'll do when we finish now. But if you want to read it now, we can do it.
I thought we can read it to make our, clearer. I mean, whatever you say.
I was planning to do it when we complete the whole thing, but we can read it now if you want. So you want to read Vidya and Avidya and birth and non-birth, or right now we're doing birth and non-birth?
Yeah, birth and non-birth.
Yeah. The reason for this is everybody opened on page 87?
Thank you.
Pleasure. Yeah. Because this is giving the entire, in short, all the different opposites that have been dealt with through Isha Upanishad. The reason for this double movement of the thinker, Manishi, is that we are intended to realize immortality in the birth. The self is uniform and undying, and in itself always possesses immortality. Right? It does not need to descend into avidya in birth to get that immortality of non-birth. The self, meaning the Brahman who has become all, it is always uniform, it is undying, it is always enjoying immortality. It did not need to come into birth to enjoy immortality, for it possesses it always. It descends in order to realize and possess it as the individual Brahman in the play of world existence. Why is it descended? To be able to enjoy immortality as the individual Brahman. Because the self as the whole, the one soul, is anyway enjoying immortality. It is immortal. Right? It accepts birth and death, assumes the ego, and then, dissolving the ego by the recovery of unity, realizes itself as the Lord, the One, and birth as only a becoming of the Lord in mental and formal being. It's a very, very long sentence, needs to be broken up. It accepts birth and death. This we understand, that when it becomes the individual, it accepts the birth and death and all the problems of the phenomenal living. Assumes the ego. It also takes on the form of the ego. And then dissolving the ego. And then when it starts evolving, it starts dissolving the ego by the recovery of unity and realizes itself as the Lord Himself. the one. He realizes itself as the Lord, the one. And what does it realize? And it realizes birth is only a becoming of the Lord in the mental and formal being. He realizes, the self realizes that this birth is a becoming of the Lord for a particular purpose. And birth is only a becoming of the Lord in mental and formal being. This becoming is now governed by the true sight of the seer. And now, because the soul, that soul has become a seer, it can see. It is seeing that the becoming is governed by the true sight of the seer. And once this is done, becoming is no longer inconsistent with being. And because now he has become aware, then this becoming is not inconsistent with the being itself. Birth becomes a means and not an obstacle to the enjoyment of immortality by the Lord of this formal habitation. Then birth is not something that is inimical, an obstacle to reaching immortality. This is our proper course, and not to remain forever in the chain of birth and death, nor to flee from birth into a pure non-becoming. So what is our proper course of action? That we remain in birth and we become seers of who we really are, and we consciously start evolving and reaching there, and then we are able to gain immortality while in birth. This is our proper course, and it is not our proper course to remain in chain of birth and death. Nor should we try to flee, nor should we try to run away from birth into a pure non-becoming. The bondage does not consist in the physical act of becoming. It is not that the divine has become, so we have become bound, but in the persistence of the ignorant sense of the separate ego. To keep on remembering Vidya and Avidya, it is Avidya of my separativeness. I am separate from you, I am separate from the all. It is this separative sense, when we forget the unity, that we are actually all, there is only one. When we get that oneness, that sense of oneness, then that separativeness is actually dissolved. The mind creates the chain and not the body. As I said earlier, that it is that when did the evil start? The error and evil started with the mind, not with the body. There is nothing evil in the body, it's the mind. Because the mind creates the division of mera or tera. Right? That is it. So instead of 2 hours, we've been able to complete in 1.5 hours. And I think we've done a very beautiful chapter and a little heavy also. So instead of continuing tomorrow, we should give a day's gap so that you are able to absorb what you've understood in birth and non-birth. Maybe even read it again to absorb it before we move ahead to verses 15 and 16. Verses 15 and 16 have been elaborately explained by Sri Aurobindo, and that may take time. That may not happen so fast, because it's a full 10 pages in comparison to 4 pages. So it will take a little longer, but yes.
Can I say something?
Yes, please. Yes.
What I've understood, I want to put it in words and just correct me if I'm correct, okay? If I'm wrong.
Okay.
Experiencing immortality in the embodied state,
yes,
is the union of birth and non-birth. Am I correct? And
yes.
This is what Brahman is. This is what the transcendental, the Swayambhu is.
Yes. Very
is
good.
it correct?
Yes.
Is it correct?
Yes.
So that is big. And this is all about Isha Upanishad, the union of the opposites. So this is also a union of opposite, like birth and non-birth are opposites. But when it is united, that is this form creates what you call
enjoyment of immortality.
Immortality.
Enjoyment of
correct?
immortality
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
embodied individual.
Yeah. Is it correct?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. Good.
Okay.
By
Okay.
Vidya and Avidya, by
Yeah. Birth and non-birth.
by renunciation and enjoyment. The
Verse
first
1.
duplicate,
Verse 1.
the first opposite, that was renunciation and enjoyment. Tena tyaktena bhunjitha ma gridha kasya svidhanam. That you tena tyaktena, you offer and then you enjoy. So that was the first. So there are many opposites, but right now we have done birth and non-birth.
But immortality actually deals with birth and non-birth in the actual meaning of it.
Immortality is also there with Vidya and Avidya.
Vidya. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
By that, at the same time, Vidya and Avidya is being conscious at the same time of the unity, of that oneness of the whole being, of the being and the becoming. And Avidya is when we get into the embodiment and then we start living the phenomenal life where we live in the separateness, in the multiplicity, unaware of Vidya, unaware of the oneness. So while we are in the multiplicity, we must be aware of the oneness. Right?
Thank you. Thank you, Anjali.
Good, Jeeti. Very good. Any other questions?
Thanks, Anjali. Hari Om.
Hari Om. Who's that?
Neelam.
Neelam. Hi, Neelam.
Hi. That was very superb.
Thank you, Anjali. That was very nice. Really great
clear,
session.
na, Neelam? Not
As
clear.
always.
Really nice.
Anjali, are we going to have another session day after then?
Yes, we'll do it. I'll prepare for the 15th and 16th.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, great.
Yeah. So, and then we'll do it 2 or 3 days in continuation. So we don't break while we are in the middle of a chapter. Yeah. So we may do it Thursday, Friday and Saturday. Everybody's fine with that, right?
Absolutely.
I don't know.
Wonderful. Okay, we should end with the mantra.
Okay, I thought it was, I just wanted to find out something. Anyways.
Yeah. Somebody was saying something. I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Who's that? Is that Renu?
Yeah, I'm Renu. Anjali, actually, I might sound very stupid, but when you were explaining, when you were explaining that we can enjoy mortality in the immortality in this physical world, in mortality, in the state of mortality only, and what's the use of enjoying it in the void? But what suddenly struck me, कि void है कहाँ? If the immortal cannot be void, ना? आपने कहा कि वो void में नहीं enjoy कर सकते हैं, पर वो void तो है ही नहीं ना? Is my question. I mean, पता नहीं, मेरे को ऐसे feel हुआ कि ये void कहाँ है? वो immortal cannot be void.
Very beautiful. Very, very beautiful thought. So, some people have talked about it. For instance, Buddha has called it the nihil. Right? And we may not call it the void. We may not call it nirvana. We may not use the Buddhist terminology. But we have to remember that there is an Akshara Brahman, right?
Yeah.
Which is static, which doesn't move, which is pure, unmoving, unchanging. And if we reach there, then how will we enjoy immortality? Because that is immortal anyways in its very nature.
But then are we not above the feeling of enjoyment then? Then I don't think then हम तो मर्ज ही हो गए ना, फिर हमें पता ही नहीं है कि हम अलग हैं. तो enjoyment है कि नहीं, वो भी तो हमें नहीं पता होता ना फिर.
वही तो बता रहा है, Isha Upanishad is saying exactly the same thing. How will you enjoy the immortality when you are anyway that, you've become that and you've merged into it? But when you are separate from it, you're living a life here in this earth which is mortal, where everything is phenomenal, where everything is governed by time and space, where there are other dualities. While in this embodied condition, when you realize what is immortality and when you disentangle yourself from the grief and from all the difficulties and dualities of life, from the ego, and then you're able to actually become one with the immortal self in yourself. And while living here, then you'll be able to enjoy something that is much higher than that. Right? As I gave you the example कि अगर हम ड्रॉपलेट ऑफ हनी के साथ में मर्ज हो गए तो हम भी उस हनी के जितने स्वीट हो गए ना, then I will not be able to enjoy the taste of the honey, the sweetness of the honey. It is when I'm not sweet and then I am able to taste honey, then I'm able to enjoy honey.
Okay.
It is also
So basically in this case one has to like, मतलब एक लास्ट सीढ़ी हमको नहीं चढ़नी है. This is what I feel कि वो enjoy करते रहना है, तो हमको वो एक लास्ट सीढ़ी जो मेरे को अल्टीमेटली बना देता है, अल्टीमेट हमको वो सीढ़ी नहीं चढ़नी है.
हाँ, because अगर हम मोक्ष में ही चले गए, if I've gone into moksha or liberation, then I'm not enjoying it now. I've just become that. But in one of his beautiful sonnets, he says, see, I don't remember the exact words, I don't want to spoil his poem. In one of his sonnets, he says, keep only my soul to adore thee eternally in all forms. Something like that. I mean, I don't remember the exact words. He says that let my brain merge with you, let my heart merge with you, let my this merge with you, let my that merge with you. But keep my soul separate so that I can enjoy thee eternally. I can be separate from you.
This makes sense.
है ना?
Yeah, this makes sense. ये समझ में आ गया.
बस
ये सही है.
एक सीढ़ी रह गई है.
एक सीढ़ी रह गई. Yes.
Good one.
This is really beautiful.
Then I'll try and pull out that sonnet and I'll post it on Isha Upanishad session.
Yeah, this is actually explains it, and that void things, I at least मेरे को नहीं लगता है कि void कुछ है. I do not know. This is what I felt, and you've said कि हाँ, because if Brahman is there, void cannot be there, ना?
Exactly.
Static
Neti is a way of reaching there. कि it's not this, it's not this, it's not. But finally you realize iti, everything is in.
Yes.
There can't be a void, there can't be a blank. I understand where you're coming from, totally.
Yes.
Yeah, but these are all states of consciousness. They're not something, they're all states of consciousness. In one state of consciousness, you can feel that there's nothing, there's just him. Or there's not even him, there's just Nail. Buddha was in that state of consciousness. And he said there is nothing, there is nirvana, there is Nail. So it's okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Very nice. All these questions are so important.
Yes.
So,
okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
We can end with the mantra.
Yeah.
Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamaya Purnamavashishyate Half a minute of silence and thank you to the divine.